I kissed a man I'd never met before, and the worst part wasn't that I did it in front of his brother. It was that I didn't regret it. Not even a little. Let me back up. His name was Adrian Mercer. We'd been together for 8 months, which in Toronto time feels both shorter and longer than it sounds. 8 months of splitting Uber Eats bills and arguing about whose turn it was to pick the movie on Friday nights. 8 months of him leaving his gym bag by the door and me pretending it didn't bother me. It was easy, comfortable. The kind of relationship that looks good in your camera roll but feels a little hollow when you're lying awake at 3 in the morning. I told myself that was normal. Everyone feels that way sometimes, right? His family was old money. Not in the flashy way, but in the quiet, inevitable way. The kind that doesn't announce itself but is somehow visible in everything. The way Adrian never checked prices at restaurants. The way his mother Janet... No, wait. I should say, the way his mother answered my texts with 3 words or fewer, always lowercase, always somehow making me feel like I was wasting her time. His family had built one of the most successful private equity firms in Ontario, over 3 generations, the kind of firm that operated out of a glass tower on Bay Street and never needed to advertise. I was a structural engineer at a mid-size firm in the Annex. I made decent money. I had a condo in Leslieville that I was still very much paying off. I drove a 2019 Civic that needed new brakes. By any reasonable standard, I was doing fine. By Mercer family standards, I was a charity case they hadn't voted on yet. Adrian never said that. He was careful not to say that. But I felt it in the long pauses when I mentioned my work projects, in the way his mother asked me what my firm specialized in, with that particular tone that implied she already knew the answer wasn't impressive. I felt it most at their annual winter gala, which was held every February, at a restored heritage estate out in Kings City. The kind of event where people wore things that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment without blinking. I almost didn't go. Adrian had mentioned the gala in passing, once, in November. My family does this thing every February, I'll send you the details, and then didn't mention it again until 10 days before, when he texted me asking what I was wearing. No, would you like to come? No, I want you there. Just an assumption that I'd be present and appropriately dressed. I spent 3 weeks' worth of overtime on a gown I found at a consignment shop in Kensington Market. Dark green velvet. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever owned. My best friend, her name was Adaze, and she had approximately 0 patience for what she called my Mercer delusion, told me I looked like I belonged in a pre-Raphaelite painting. She also told me Adrian didn't deserve me. She'd been saying that for 4 months. I was starting to run out of counter-arguments. The estate was stunning in the way that only genuinely old buildings are, the kind of stunning that doesn't try. White string lights wrapped the bare oak trees along the drive. Inside, the ceilings were high enough to make the chandelier look modest, and the whole place smelled like cedar and expensive candles. There were maybe 200 people there, and somehow every single one of them seemed to know each other. Adrian was attentive at first. He got me a drink, introduced me to a few people, kept his hand at the small of my back. Then someone pulled him aside. A business contact, he said, and the hand left my back, and 20 minutes became 40, and I found myself standing near the fireplace in the east drawing room, pretending to be deeply interested in a landscape painting I didn't understand. That was when someone stepped up beside me. "It's a Krieghoff," he said. I turned. He was looking at the painting, not at me. Dark suit, no tie, top button undone. The only person in the room dressed that way. He was taller than Adrian, broader through the shoulders, and there was something in the set of his jaw that felt familiar in a way I couldn't immediately place. "Sorry?" I said. "Cornelius Krieghoff, Canadian painter, mid-1800s. My grandmother bought it at a Sotheby's auction in Montreal in 1987. She always said she overpaid." He finally looked at me. His eyes were a shade of gray I'd never seen on a person before, like the sky just before a storm decides what it's going to do. "Are you a guest, or did my mother invite you to stand here specifically to make the painting look better?" I blinked. Adrian's girlfriend. Something moved across his face. Quick, controlled, gone before I could name it. "Right," he said. And then, after a pause that lasted just a second too long, "I'm Reed. Not Mr. Mercer. Just Reed." "Serena," I said. He didn't shake my hand. He just nodded, like he was filing the information away somewhere. Adrian hadn't told me he had a brother. Or more accurately, he'd mentioned a brother once, early on, in the way you mention a complicated piece of furniture you've learned to walk around. Reed runs the firm, he'd said, and then changed the subject so smoothly I hadn't thought to push. I assumed they were close in the way that families in that tax bracket present as close. Coordinated, surface level, performing for an audience. Standing next to Reed Mercer, I understood that was not the situation. He was, I would learn later that night, 34 years old, 3 years older than Adrian. He had run Mercer Capital since he was 28, when their father had a cardiac event and stepped back from operations. He had never been publicly linked to anyone. No photos, no charity gala appearances, no profiles in Toronto life. He existed in the city the way certain buildings exist, structurally important, not decorative. He was also, and I say this as someone who spent the next 40 minutes trying very hard not to notice, the most compelling person I had ever been in a room with. We talked about the painting, then about Krieghoff's habit of repeating compositions, nearly identical scenes sold to different buyers who never knew. Then somehow about whether repetition was fraud or just efficiency. He had opinions, sharp, dry ones, delivered without the social softening I'd grown accustomed to in Adrian's world. He didn't ask me what I did in that evaluative way. He asked what I was working on, and when I told him about the mixed-use development my firm was handling in Scarborough, he asked a follow-up question that told me he actually understood what I'd said. I forgot to watch the door for Adrian. When Adrian finally appeared, flushed from whatever conversation had eaten the last hour, his eyes found Reed first. Something passed between them that I didn't have the vocabulary for yet. Then his eyes found me, and his expression shifted into something careful and pleasant that I recognized as his public face. "You found each other," he said. "She found the Krieghoff," Reed said. "I just explained it." Adrian laughed. It sounded slightly off. "Reed's the family historian. Comes with running everything." He said it lightly, but the word everything landed with a weight he'd intended. Reed didn't respond. He looked at me instead, briefly. Just a look, nothing in it I could prove. And then he said it was good to meet me and left. I told myself the hollow feeling in my chest when he walked away was the champagne. The rest of the gala passed in a kind of haze. Adrian was distracted, attentive in bursts, apologetic in the cab home. I said it was fine. I said I'd had a good time. I stared out the window at the winter-dark highway and thought about a painting from 1987 and a man who asked follow-up questions. I should have paid more attention to what I was feeling. I should have done a lot of things differently. What I did instead was go home, put my green gown in the dry cleaning bag, and tell myself that Reed Mercer was simply an interesting person I'd met at a party. That was allowed. That was nothing. I almost believed it. The second time I saw him was 6 weeks later, and I wasn't supposed to. Adrian had invited me to a small dinner at the family house in Rosedale. Not an event, just family, he said, which turned out to mean Adrian, his mother, his younger sister Fiona, and approximately $400,000 worth of art on the walls. Reed, Adrian mentioned at the last minute, was supposed to be in Vancouver for a deal. He wouldn't be there. He was there. He arrived 40 minutes into dinner, coming in through the side door in a coat still cold from outside, and I heard him before I saw him, his voice in the hallway, low and unhurried, talking to the woman who managed the house. Then he walked into the dining room and stopped when he saw me. It lasted less than a second. Then he pulled out the chair across from me, sat down, and said hello to the table like he'd planned to be there all along. "Vancouver?" his mother said. "Pushed to Thursday," he said. He poured himself water from the carafe. The infrastructure due diligence took longer than expected. He said it to his mother. But he looked at me when he said infrastructure. That was the first time I thought, this is a problem. We didn't speak directly for most of dinner. His mother dominated the conversation, as she apparently always did. Questions about the firm, about Fiona's MBA program at Rotman, about whether Adrian had spoken to their lawyer about the cottage trust. I sat beside Adrian, ate my meal, answered when addressed. I was very careful not to look across the table more than was polite. I looked across the table more than was polite. He caught me once. He didn't smile. He didn't look away. He just held it for a moment that lasted slightly too long, and then his mother asked him something, and the moment was over, and I excused myself to find the bathroom and stood in the hallway for approximately 90 seconds, trying to remember what a normal face felt like. Adrian didn't notice. Adrian never noticed. On the way home, he was in a good mood. The dinner had gone well. His mother had been less cutting than usual. Fiona was funny when she was comfortable. He held my hand in the car and talked about potentially taking a trip to Portugal in the spring. I said it sounded great. I looked at the city, passing by the window. I thought about the way Reed had said infrastructure. I know how this sounds. I know. But here is the thing about spending 8 months in a relationship that functions without quite fitting. You stop noticing the discomfort until something puts it in contrast. I hadn't been looking for contrast. I hadn't gone to that gala hoping for anything other than to survive it. I hadn't chosen any of this, and yet. The third time I saw Reed was the last time everything was still technically fine. Adrian had a work trip. He went to Calgary for a week, something about meetings with a pension fund client, and he asked me to pick up a document from the Mercer offices on Bay Street on my lunch break. An NDA that had been printed and signed needed to go to their solicitors the same day. He said his assistant was out sick. He said it would take 5 minutes. It took 45. I arrived at the reception desk on the 31st floor, gave Adrian's name, and waited. The assistant, not the sick one, a different one named Paul, who had the energy of someone who had been doing this for 30 years and found it mildly funny, told me Mr. Mercer would bring it down himself. I assumed he meant Adrian's father, who I hadn't met. Reed stepped out of the elevator instead. He was in full work mode, suit jacket on, phone in hand, the particular focused energy of someone between 15 things. He stopped when he saw me. Again, just for a second. Adrian asked me to pick up. Paul told me. He handed me the envelope. Thin, cream-colored, the firm's crest embossed on the seal. He could have couriered this. He said it was time-sensitive. It's not, particularly. He paused. Do you have a few minutes? I should have said no. I had a structural review at 2 o'clock and a half-eaten sandwich back at my office. Sure, I said. We went to a coffee shop 2 blocks down. Not the fancy kind. A second cup with mismatched chairs and a draft from the door every time someone came in. He ordered black coffee. I ordered a latte with oat milk and mentally prepared to be slightly judged. He wasn't judging me. He was watching me the same way he'd watched me at the gala. Like I was a problem he was genuinely interested in solving. We talked for 35 minutes. About my project in Scarborough, which had hit a setback. A soil contamination issue that required a full reassessment of the foundation design. He asked questions that were specific enough to tell me he'd looked something up between the gala and now. I didn't know what to do with that information, so I filed it somewhere I couldn't easily access. He told me he'd grown up wanting to be an architect. I stared at him. You're serious, I said. My father had different ideas about what I should do with a Mercer degree. He said it without bitterness, which was somehow worse. I took 1 undergraduate class in architectural theory at U of T. Dropped it when my father found out. That's sad, he said. Dry, precise. It is a little. I laughed before I meant to. It startled both of us. He smiled. A real one, brief and slightly surprised, and it was the first time I'd seen him look anything other than controlled. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then his phone lit up on the table and the moment folded closed. I'll let you get back, he said. I nodded. I picked up the envelope. I left. I sat in my car in the parkade for 8 minutes before I started the engine. I told a daze that night. All of it. Both times, the look across the dinner table, the coffee shop, the smile. I told her while we were eating takeout pho on her couch in Parkdale, and she put her chopsticks down halfway through and looked at me with the expression of someone who has been proven right and takes no pleasure in it. You know what this is, she said. It's nothing, I said. Serena, he's my boyfriend's brother. Yes, nothing happened. Yet, she said, not cruelly, just, yet, like she was reading the last page of a book she'd already predicted. I went home and called Adrian. We talked for 20 minutes about Portugal and what neighborhood to stay in. He was sweet. He was easy. I fell asleep feeling guilty about something I hadn't done. The something I hadn't done happened 3 weeks later. It was a Saturday in April, and Adrian had invited me to his family's charity polo match out in Caledon. The Mercer Foundation hosted it annually, a fundraiser for a kids' sports access program, the kind of event that felt genuinely good-intentioned while still somehow costing $1,200 a table. It was outdoors. It was cold the way April in Ontario is always cold when you want it to be warm, and I was wearing a coat over my dress and internally questioning every choice I had made since November. Adrian was on the field for the first half. He actually played, which I had known in theory but forgotten in practice. I stood with Fiona near the pavilion, and she was good company, easy and funny and quietly watching her brother, with the expression of someone who had complicated feelings she'd learned to organize. "Reed doesn't play," she told me at some point. I hadn't asked. "No? He says polo is financial performance anxiety with horses." She said it exactly the way he would have said it. "He's probably not wrong." I laughed. Across the field, I could see the back of a dark jacket that I recognized without meaning to. At halftime, the field cleared, people refilled their glasses, and I stepped away from the pavilion to get some space and some air. I walked around the side of the main tent, found a quieter patch of ground where the noise dropped a few decibels, and stood there looking at the Caldon Hills going green in the distance. Footsteps behind me. I knew before I turned. "You're hiding," Reed said. "I'm admiring the landscape," I said. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." He stopped a few feet away, hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the same view. "You know this land used to be. If you're about to explain the geological history of the Oak Ridges moraine, I will actually be impressed," I said. He turned to look at me. Something in his expression shifted. That brief unlocking I'd only seen once before in the second cup, when I'd made him smile by accident. "Glacial deposits," he said. 13,000 years ago." "I know," I said. "I'm a structural engineer. I think about what's under the ground more than most people." He was quiet for a moment. The sound of the crowd carried from around the corner, muffled and festive, belonging to a different scene. "Why are you with my brother?" he said. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't a declaration. It was the kind of question that comes out when someone has been holding it for too long and the grip finally slips. I didn't answer for a long moment. "He's kind," I finally said. "He's consistent. It's easy." "Easy," Reed repeated. "There's nothing wrong with easy." "No," he said. "There isn't." A pause. "Is that enough for you?" I didn't answer. I think he already knew. He stepped closer. Not dramatically, not like a movie, just a step, which somehow made it worse. He wasn't touching me. He was just standing close enough that I was aware of every inch between us. "Serena," he said. Just my name. The way he said it. Not the way Adrian said it. Not easy and familiar, but careful, like it mattered to get it right. I looked up at him. And I don't know. I genuinely don't know how to explain what happened next, except that something that had been building since February, since a painting in a chandelier and a man who asked follow-up questions, just reached the end of its lane. I leaned up and I kissed him. It lasted 3 seconds. Maybe 4. When I pulled back, Reed wasn't smiling. He looked like someone who had just confirmed a calculation he'd run 100 times. "I've been trying not to let that happen," he said quietly. "I know," I said. "So have I." The sound of Adrian's voice, from around the side of the tent, calling my name, cheerful and unaware, hit me like cold water. I stepped back. Reed stepped back. The space between us returned. I walked around the corner and found Adrian coming toward me, flush from the match, stick still in his hand, happy. He didn't know. He kissed my cheek. He said the second half was starting. He took my hand and walked me back toward the pavilion. I went. I looked back once. Reed was still standing where I'd left him. He wasn't watching me. He was looking at the Caldon Hills. His expression was the most unguarded I'd ever seen it. I looked away. What followed was the worst 6 weeks of my life, and I say that as someone who once had a foundation reassessment go wrong under a 12-story building. I didn't see Reed. I stopped going to Mercer family events. Not obviously, not all at once, but with the gradual withdrawal of someone who knows they've walked too close to an edge. I was attentive to Adrian in ways that felt like compensation, cooking dinner more, texting back faster, agreeing to Portugal with real enthusiasm instead of performed enthusiasm. I told myself it had been a moment, that moment's happen, that I was choosing. A daze asked me once, carefully, how I was doing. "Fine," I said. She looked at me. "Okay," she said. She knew I wasn't going to tell her the truth yet. She let me have it. The thing I hadn't accounted for was Reed. He emailed me on a Wednesday in May. Not my personal email, my work email, which he'd apparently found through the firm's public directory. The email was 4 lines long. He said there was a structural assessment firm the Mercer Foundation had been meaning to engage for a community project in Regent Park. A youth center, a real one, not a vanity project. He said my name had come up as a recommendation. He said if I was interested in the work he could make an introduction. No obligation, no expectation of anything. The last line said, "I'm sorry if I made things harder. That wasn't my intention." I read it 5 times. Then I forwarded it to a daze with no text, just the email. She replied, "Are you going to take the work?" I replied, "I don't know." She replied, "Are you going to break up with Adrian?" I didn't reply for 2 hours. Then I typed, "I don't know that either." She called me instead. We talked for an hour. I cried for about 20 minutes of it, which was the first time I'd cried about any of this, which told me something about how long I'd been holding it. "You're not a bad person," Adaze said at one point. I kissed my boyfriend's brother. "You're a person who kissed someone she has feelings for. The fact that it's complicated doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a person in a complicated situation. That feels like a distinction without a difference." "It's not," she said. "A bad person wouldn't be this upset about it." I thought about that for a long time. I broke up with Adrian on a Friday evening in late May, at his apartment in person. I owed him that much. I didn't tell him about Reed. I told him the truth, which was that I'd been unhappy for longer than I'd admitted, that I'd been performing ease rather than feeling it, that he deserved someone who was fully there. He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked if there was someone else. I said, "Not in the way you mean." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded, slowly, and said, "I think I've known for a while that we weren't quite right." It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. I cried on the subway home. A woman across from me handed me a packet of tissues from her purse without comment, which is a very Canadian thing to do. And I thought about how kind strangers can be when you're falling apart in public. I didn't contact Reed. I gave myself a month. I threw myself into work. The Scarborough project moved back on schedule. I was brought in on a new development in Etobicoke that was challenging in the best way, the kind of problem that required genuine creative thinking. Daisy and I went to the AGO on a Sunday and stood in front of things that were beautiful without needing to be understood. I started sleeping through the night again. A month after the breakup, my phone lit up. "Reed, I heard about you and Adrian. Are you okay?" I stared at it for a long time. "Me, yes." "Are you, Reed?" Complicated question. "Me, I know." A pause. The 3 dots appeared and disappeared twice. "Reed, would you like to get coffee?" I thought about the Caledon Hills, about glacial deposits 13,000 years old, about a painting from 1987, and a man who dropped an architecture class because his father said no and never quite recovered from it. About 3 seconds, maybe 4. I thought about what Adieze had said. "You chose your heart. That's either a flaw or a feature depending on who you ask." Me, second cup? "Reed, somewhere better. I owe you that." I smiled at my phone in my empty kitchen, which is not something I would have predicted for myself 6 months ago. There are things I still think about. I think about the look on Adrian's face in his apartment, that quiet confirmed recognition that something had been off for a long time. I think about his dignity in that moment, and I respect him for it. I think about whether I handled it the way I should have, whether I could have been more honest sooner, whether a different version of me would have said something at the Winter Gala and saved us all 6 months of misalignment. I think about it. I don't have clean answers. What I have is this: sitting across from Reed Mercer at a restaurant in the Distillery District, on a Thursday evening in late June, the kind of place with exposed brick and good natural wine, and watching him explain something about the history of the building we were in, how the original distillery had been built in 1832, how the limestone foundation was some of the most structurally sound masonry in the city, and realizing he'd looked it up because he knew I'd find it interesting. "You looked that up," I said. He didn't pretend he hadn't. I did. I looked at him across the table. This man who was difficult and careful, and had wanted to be an architect, and had been standing in front of a painting in February hoping I would notice him, which I had, which we'd both tried very hard to pretend wasn't happening. "The foundation," I said, "is it actually that good?" "Superior lime mortar, exceptional aggregate quality. It's outlasted everything built around it by decades." "That," I said, "is the most structurally romantic thing anyone has ever said to me." He laughed, a real one, full and unguarded, the second real laugh I'd ever gotten out of him. It looked good on him. It looked like something he didn't let himself do often enough. I didn't choose easy. I know that. Easy was 8 months of comfort and distance, and performing a version of myself that fit a frame I'd never quite filled. What I chose was harder and messier, and came at a cost I still carry. Not with guilt, exactly, but with the weight of knowing that real choices leave marks. But I chose a man who looked up the geological history of a moraine, because I'd mentioned I thought about what was under the ground. I chose someone who made space for the version of me that asked real questions and wanted real answers. I chose the foundation that had outlasted everything built around it. Whether that makes me brave or reckless, I'll leave for the comments to decide.